The ancient heart of Ravenscroft Manor had long since ceased to beat with life. Its towering spires pierced the perpetual twilight sky, a grotesque monument to faded glory and unspoken sin. Within its crumbling walls, Victor Dracul gazed out through dust-veiled windows at the moonlit forest that both imprisoned and protected him. 300 years of exile had weathered his once regal features, though immortality kept him eternally suspended between youth and true age, like a forgotten portrait slowly collecting the patina of time without ever fully decaying. Victor's fingers, pale as death yet strong as steel, traced the cold glass. The moon hung heavy tonight, a bloated silver eye staring down at his punishment. How many moons had he watched alone? How many centuries had he endured, banished from the Crimson Court, stripped of rank, of purpose, of honor? The memories came unbidden, as they often did on nights when the moon showed her full face. He had once been alpha of the most powerful vampire coven on the continent. His word had been law, his strength unquestioned, until treachery, both others and his own, had cost him everything. "Master," came a voice from the shadows, interrupting his reverie, "the hour grows late. Would you like me to prepare your evening sustenance?" Barnabas, his sole remaining servant, stepped into the dim candlelight. Unlike Victor, Barnabas was human, descended from a long line of caretakers pledged to serve the exiled vampire. Each generation passed down the solemn duty, bearing witness to Victor's endless penance. "No," Victor replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. "I have no appetite tonight." Barnabas bowed slightly. "As you wish. Though I must remind you, it has been nearly a fortnight since you last fed. Even one such as yourself requires nourishment." Victor turned from the window, his movement so swift it appeared he had not moved at all, but rather transformed from one position to another. "Your concern is noted, old friend, but tonight I find myself preoccupied with memories rather than hunger." The servant's weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes, sharp despite his 70 years, showed understanding. "The court has sent another messenger." It wasn't a question. The Crimson Court never truly forgot their fallen alpha, though they had banished him. Every decade they sent emissaries to ensure his continued exile and to remind him of his shame. "Yes," Victor confirmed, "they grow more insistent in their inquiries." "They fear what they do not understand," Barnabas offered, lighting another candle against the deepening gloom. Victor's laugh was hollow, echoing through the vast chamber like a stone dropped down a forgotten well. "They fear what they understand all too well, Barnabas. Power. Mine has not diminished with exile, merely changed." He crossed to the massive hearth where flames danced half-heartedly against the autumn chill. The fire cast strange, elongated shadows across the stone floor, making the room seem to undulate like the surface of a dark sea. "The Crimson Court whispers that the balance shifts," Victor continued, more to himself than to his servant. "The old agreements between the covens fray. They think I cannot hear their whispers from my prison, but the wind carries secrets to those patient enough to listen." Barnabas remained silent, knowing his master's moods well enough to recognize when words were meant only for the shadows. The manor creaked around them, its ancient bones settling as the temperature dropped further. Outside, the wind picked up, sending dead leaves scuttling across the overgrown grounds like tiny, panicked creatures fleeing an unseen predator. "I will retire to the library," Victor announced suddenly. "See that I am not disturbed." "Of course, master." Barnabas bowed deeply this time, his aged spine protesting the movement. As he straightened, a new sound intruded upon the night's quiet symphony of wind and settling stone. A distant, desperate pounding at the manor's seldom-used front gate. Both men froze, listening. No visitors came to Ravenscroft Manor, none were welcome, and few would dare. The pounding came again, more frantic now. "Shall I send them away?" Barnabas asked, his hand already reaching for the iron poker beside the hearth, a meagre weapon against most threats, but the old man would defend his master nonetheless. Victor raised one hand, his head tilted slightly as he focused his preternatural senses outward. "No," he said after a moment, surprise coloring his normally impassive tone. "A child, Barnabas echoed, disbelief evident. "Here? And something else," Victor added, his eyes narrowing. "Blood, fresh blood." Without another word, the vampire lord vanished from the room, moving at a speed no human eye could track. Barnabas sighed and followed at his much slower pace, knowing that whatever awaited them at the gate would surely disrupt the careful monotony of their secluded existence. By the time Barnabas reached the manor's cavernous entrance hall, Victor had already thrown open the ancient oak doors. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and frost and, yes, the unmistakable copper tang of blood. Standing on the threshold, dwarfed by the massive doorway, was a girl no more than 8 years old. Her clothes, once fine but now torn and muddied, clung to her thin frame. Dark hair hung in tangled curtains around a face pale with terror and exhaustion. But it was her eyes that arrested Victor's attention, large, amber-colored, and filled with a desperate hope upon seeing the manor's occupants. "Please," she whispered, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "They're coming." Victor stood motionless, staring down at the unexpected visitor. In 3 centuries of exile, no child had ever approached his domain. Adults occasionally ventured near, thrill-seekers, lost travelers, once even a would-be vampire hunter, but never a child. Children instinctively sensed the wrongness that permeated places like Ravencroft. The girl swayed slightly, and Victor noticed the dark stain spreading across her left side. Blood seeped through her tattered dress, dripping onto the weathered stone of the entryway. "Who comes for you, child?" he asked, his voice softer than Barnabas had heard it in decades. The girl's eyes widened at his question, as though surprised he would ask, rather than simply shut the door in her face. "Bad men," she answered, glancing fearfully over her shoulder at the dark forest beyond the gate. "They killed my papa. They tried to take me." Her voice broke on the last words, and fresh tears carved clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks. Victor's nostrils flared imperceptibly as he caught the scent of the approaching hunters. Humans, at least 5 of them, armed and moving with purpose through his forest. Ordinarily, he would let such trespassers become entangled in the wood's natural defenses, the poisonous flora, the disorienting mists, the paths that circled back on themselves. Few who entered uninvited ever found their way out again, but the girl's presence complicated matters. She had somehow navigated those same defenses, driven by terror and perhaps guided by whatever strange fate had led her to his door. "Barnabas," Victor said without turning, "prepare the east chamber and fetch bandages for our guest." The servant hesitated only briefly before nodding. "At once, master." As Barnabas retreated into the house, Victor knelt before the child, bringing himself to her eye level, a courtesy he rarely extended to anyone, much less a human. "What is your name?" "Eleanor," she answered, her voice steadying slightly now that the immediate threat of rejection had passed. "Eleanor Blackwood." Something flickered in Victor's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or some deeper disturbance. "Blackwood," he repeated, the name like ashes on his tongue. Eleanor nodded, then winced as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her injured side. "Papa said to run to the dark house if anything ever happened to him. He said someone there would help me." Victor's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Your father sent you here. To me." "He never said who lived here," Eleanor admitted. "Just that it was a safe place if there was no other choice." Her small hand pressed against her side, coming away sticky with blood. "I don't think I could have run much further anyway." Before Victor could respond, a distant shout echoed from the forest's edge. Eleanor flinched, instinctively stepping closer to the vampire, whose presence should have terrified her far more than any mortal hunter. "They found the path," she whispered, panic edging back into her voice. In a single fluid motion, Victor rose and pulled the girl gently inside, closing the massive door behind her. "They will not find you here," he assured her, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The vampire lord studied the child before him, this unexpected complication in his carefully ordered exile. Blackwood. The name carried echoes of a past he had long tried to forget, a past inextricably tied to his fall from grace and subsequent banishment. Could it be coincidence? After 3 centuries, he no longer believed in such things. "Come," he said, offering his hand to the frightened girl. "Let us tend to your wound, while we wait for your pursuers to lose themselves among the trees." Eleanor hesitated only a moment before placing her small, warm hand in his cold one. The simple trust of the gesture struck Victor like a physical blow. How long had it been since any creature had touched him, without fear or ulterior motive? As he led her deeper into the manor, Victor was acutely aware of the blood trail she left behind, tiny droplets marking her path across ancient stone floors that had not known a child's footsteps in centuries. The scent called to the predator within him, a hunger he had mastered long ago but never truly vanquished. Yet stronger than hunger was his growing curiosity. What connection did this child have to the Blackwood name? Why had her father directed her to seek sanctuary with the very creature most would flee from? And perhaps most troublingly, why did Victor feel a strange compulsion to protect her? By the time they reached the east chamber, Barnabas had already lit a fire in the long dormant hearth and was turning down the bed linens, yellowed with age, but still serviceable. "Sit here, child," the old servant said, indicating a chair near the fire. "I must clean your wound before it festers." Eleanor obeyed, though her eyes never left Victor, who stood by the door watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. "They killed everyone," she said suddenly, as Barnabas began cutting away the fabric around her injury. "All the servants. Papa tried to fight them, but there were too many." "Why did they attack your home?" Victor asked, his voice carefully neutral. Eleanor winced as Barnabas applied a cloth soaked in antiseptic to her side. The wound was deep but clean, a knife thrust that had somehow missed anything vital. "They said Papa had something that belonged to their master," she answered, her brow furrowing with the effort of remembering through pain and exhaustion. "A key, I think. They kept asking where the key was." Victor's stillness became absolute, the perfect immobility that only the truly immortal could achieve. "Did your father give them what they sought?" Eleanor shook her head, then bit her lip against a fresh wave of pain as Barnabas began wrapping a bandage around her torso. "He laughed at them," she said, a ghost of pride flickering across her young face. "Even when they hurt him, he said they were too late, that the key was already where it belonged." Outside the manor's walls, the wind howled, and distant shouts suggested Eleanor's pursuers had encountered the forest's less hospitable residents. Victor barely noticed, his mind racing through implications and possibilities long thought buried. "The child needs rest, master," Barnabas interrupted, finishing his ministrations, "and nourishment when she wakes." Victor nodded absently. "See to it, then." As the servant helped Eleanor into the massive 4-poster bed, Victor turned to leave, needing solitude to process this unexpected development. "Wait," came the small voice from the bed. "Will you stay, just until I fall asleep?" Victor froze, one hand on the doorframe. He should refuse. Distance was safer, for the child as much as for himself. Yet he found himself turning back, drawn by something in her voice that echoed across centuries of isolation. "Very well," he conceded, settling into a chair near the bed. Eleanor's relief was palpable. As exhaustion finally overcame fear, her eyelids grew heavy. "Papa said you were a good man once," she murmured, already half dreaming. "He said you were punished for something you didn't do." Victor went rigid, centuries of careful control nearly shattering at her innocent words. "Your father could not possibly know such things," he said, his voice barely audible. But Eleanor was already asleep, her breathing deep and even, untroubled by the enormity of what she had revealed. In the silence that followed, Victor contemplated the sleeping child. This Impossibility, who had appeared at his door with blood on her clothes and secrets in her words. Somewhere in the forest men still searched, though their voices had grown more distant, more confused. By morning they would be gone, lost, fled, or taken by the forest's many dangers. But their masters would send others. And if Victor's suspicions about the girl's identity proved correct, the hunters would be the least of their concerns. For the first time in 300 years, Victor Dracul felt the stirrings of something long thought dead within him, purpose, perhaps even hope. The Crimson Court had been right to fear him still, he realized. Not because of what he had been, but because of what he might yet become. If a child's innocent trust could indeed restore what treachery had stolen. Part 2 emerged with the dawn. Victor stood motionless before the library's towering bookshelves, fingers tracing ancient spines as his mind processed the night's revelations. Blackwood, a name from the shadows of his past, now embodied in a child sleeping under his roof. "She's still resting," Barnabas announced from the doorway. The old servant carried a silver tray with a steaming cup. "I've prepared your morning tea." Victor nodded absently. The hunters? Gone. 2 wandered in circles until they collapsed from exhaustion. The others fled at daybreak. Barnabas placed the tray on a nearby table. "One remains in the western grove, though I suspect the nightshade will claim him before nightfall. And the child's wounds, healing well." "Remarkably so." Barnabas hesitated. "Master, her blood, it's unusual." Victor turned, his gaze sharp. "Explain." "When I cleaned her wound, the blood, it shimmered, like yours does." The revelation hung heavy in the air between them. Human blood didn't shimmer. It didn't catch the light like liquid metal. Only those with ancestral connections to the immortal bloodlines displayed such qualities. "Impossible," Victor whispered, though he'd already suspected as much. The girl had navigated the forest's defenses too easily. She'd approached him without the instinctive fear humans felt in his presence, and her father had known to send her to Ravencroft. "There has been no contact with the Blackwood line in centuries," he said, more to himself than to his servant. Barnabas cleared his throat. "There is something else. When I changed her bandages, I noticed a mark on her shoulder blade, a small crescent moon, like a birthmark." Victor went utterly still. The lunar birthmark was rare, appearing only in descendants of the most ancient vampiric bloodlines. His own bore the same mark, as had all members of the original founding families of the Crimson Court. "Bring me the estate records," Victor commanded suddenly, "the oldest ones from before my exile." As Barnabas hurried to obey, Victor sipped the tea, a bitter concoction laced with small amounts of preserved blood, barely enough to sustain him. He'd subsisted on such meager rations for centuries, part penance, part necessity. True feeding would require human victims, and he'd sworn off such indulgences after his banishment. The library door creaked open again, but it wasn't Barnabas who entered. "Hello," Eleanor said, standing uncertainly in the doorway. She wore one of Barnabas's shirts, comically large on her small frame, cinched at the waist with a length of cord. "The nice old man said I could find you here." Victor inclined his head slightly. "You should be resting." "I'm hungry," she replied simply, approaching with the fearlessness that continued to unsettle him. In the daylight, her features were more distinct. High cheekbones, a determined chin, and those unusual amber eyes that seemed to absorb and reflect the library's golden light. "Barnabas will prepare something for you," Victor said, moving to pull a bell cord. "Are you really a vampire?" Eleanor asked before he could reach it. Victor froze mid-motion, then slowly turned to face her. "What makes you ask such a question?" Eleanor shrugged, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her injury. "Papa told me stories about the Lord of Ravencroft. He said you drink blood and can't go in sunlight and have lived for hundreds of years." "And you're not afraid?" Victor asked, genuinely curious. "Papa said you wouldn't hurt me." Her certainty was absolute, childish in its simplicity, yet somehow profound. "He said we're family, sort of." The door opened again as Barnabas returned, struggling under the weight of an enormous leather-bound ledger. He paused upon seeing Eleanor, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile. "Ah, our young guest is awake. Shall I prepare breakfast?" "Yes," Victor answered, his eyes never leaving Eleanor. "And bring her father's possessions, whatever she had with her when she arrived." After Barnabas departed, Victor gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me more about your father." Eleanor perched on the edge of the massive chair, her feet dangling above the floor. "His name was Jonathan. He was a scholar. He studied old things, books and artifacts and history." Her voice faltered. "He loved me very much." "I'm sure he did," Victor said softly. "Did he ever speak of your mother?" Eleanor shook her head. "She died when I was a baby. I don't remember her." "And did your father often tell you stories about creatures like me?" "Sometimes. He had a special book about vampires and werewolves and all sorts of magical beings. He said they were real, but most people had forgotten." Her face brightened with a sudden memory. "He showed me a picture of you once. It was very old, and you were wearing fancy clothes and looked much happier." Victor fought to keep his expression neutral, though inwardly his thoughts raced. How had Jonathan Blackwood possessed a likeness of him? Such images were rare. Vampires traditionally avoided portraits precisely because they endured, while the immortals themselves changed subtly over centuries. "Eleanor," he began carefully, "the men who attacked your home, did they take anything from your father's study?" Her brow furrowed in concentration. "They were looking for something small. A key, like I told you. But Papa kept his most important things in a special box that only I knew about." "And where is this box now?" Eleanor's hand moved to her side, where her wound lay beneath bandages. "I took it before I ran. It's hidden in my dress, the one I was wearing when I came here." Before Victor could respond, Barnabas returned, bearing both breakfast for Eleanor and a small bundle. Her blood-stained clothing, carefully folded. The servant set a plate of eggs and toast before the child, who attacked it with surprising vigor. "Leave us," Victor instructed, once Barnabas had arranged everything. The old man nodded and withdrew, closing the door silently behind him. Eleanor ate quietly, while Victor examined her torn dress, finding a cleverly concealed pocket sewn into the lining. Within it, he discovered a small, lead-lined box, no larger than his palm. "Papa said not to open it," Eleanor said between bites. "He said it was only for you." Victor ran his fingers over the box's smooth surface, detecting no lock or obvious opening mechanism, yet he sensed power within, a faint, thrumming energy that resonated with something in his own blood. "Did your father tell you what's inside?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head, only that it was the key everyone was looking for, but not the kind that opens doors. She finished her breakfast and pushed the plate aside. "Are you going to help me get revenge on the bad men who killed Papa?" The question, asked with such straightforward simplicity, caught Victor off guard. "Revenge is rarely as satisfying as one hopes," he replied carefully. "But they'll keep coming for me, won't they?" Her perception startled him again. "That's why Papa sent me to you. He said you'd protect me because of what I am." "And what are you, Eleanor Blackwood?" Victor asked softly. She met his gaze unflinchingly. "The last of my line, just like you're the last of yours." Before Victor could respond to this astonishing statement, a tremendous crash echoed through the manor, the unmistakable sound of the front doors being violently forced open. Victor moved with inhuman speed, extinguishing the library's lamps and pulling Eleanor behind a bookshelf in one fluid motion. "Silence," he whispered against her ear. Footsteps echoed through the manor's halls, multiple intruders, moving with purpose. Not the clumsy hunters from the night before, but something far more dangerous. "Victor Dracul," a voice called out, cultured and commanding. "By authority of the Crimson Court, I demand audience." Victor's jaw tightened. He recognized that voice. Lazarus, High Inquisitor of the court, and one of those who had orchestrated his downfall centuries ago. Not a coincidence, then. Eleanor's arrival and the court's sudden interest were undoubtedly connected. "Stay here," he instructed the child, placing the lead box in her hands. "Whatever happens, do not leave this spot until I return for you." Eleanor nodded, her earlier bravado replaced by genuine fear as she clutched the box to her chest. Victor slipped from behind the bookshelf and closed the library door behind him, locking it with an ancient key from his pocket. In the grand entrance hall, 5 figures waited. 4 were obviously guards, tall, imposing vampires wearing the crimson and black uniforms of the court's elite enforcers. At their center stood Lazarus, unchanged since Victor had last seen him. Slender, aristocratic, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes like polished obsidian. 3 centuries of exile and still you forget your manners, Lazarus remarked, examining his surroundings with thinly veiled disgust. "No greeting for an official representative of the court? You break down my door and expect courtesies," Victor replied coldly. "State your purpose and be gone, Lazarus. I've abided by the terms of my banishment." Lazarus smiled thinly. "Have you? We received disturbing reports of unusual activities, human hunters in your forest, blood spilled on your threshold." His nostrils flared slightly, "and a child's scent permeating your halls." "My servant is human," Victor countered. "His grandniece visits occasionally. A convenient explanation." Lazarus gestured, and his guards spread out, clearly intending to search the mansion. "But the court requires verification. These are unstable times. Your guards take one more step, and they will find themselves significantly shorter," Victor said, his voice deadly calm. "My banishment grants me sovereignty over Ravencroft. Even the court cannot violate that." Lazarus's smile vanished. "Circumstances have changed. The ancient pacts are failing. Surely even in your isolation you felt the shifts in power." Victor revealed nothing, though indeed he had sensed disturbances in the mystical currents that bound the supernatural world. Dreams of ancient prophecies had plagued him for months, warnings he had dismissed as the product of too many years alone. "The court faces challenges," Lazarus continued when Victor remained silent. "New factions rise, old enemies resurface. Some whisper that the time is ripe for your rehabilitation." "The court sentenced me to eternal exile," Victor reminded him coldly, "after a trial that was a mockery of justice. Yet here I stand, offering you a chance at redemption." Lazarus spread his hands in a gesture of apparent magnanimity. "Return with me to the court. Pledge your allegiance anew. Your power and experience would be valuable in these troubled times." Victor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You condemned me as a traitor, stripped me of rank and honor, and now seek my help. Your desperation reeks, Lazarus." The High Inquisitor's expression hardened. "Not desperation. Pragmatism. But my offer has conditions. We've received intelligence about a missing artifact, a key of significant mystical importance, allegedly in possession of one Jonathan Blackwood." Victor kept his expression neutral, though inwardly his suspicions crystallized into certainty. "I know no one by that name." "No?" Lazarus raised an elegant eyebrow. "How curious, when our sources indicate his daughter fled directly to Ravencroft after his unfortunate demise." "Your sources are mistaken." "Are they?" Lazarus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The child bears the lunar birthmark, Victor, the first to manifest in the Blackwood line in 7 generations. Surely you understand the implications." Victor did, all too clearly. The birthmark signified potential, the dormant vampiric bloodline awakening after centuries of dilution through human interbreeding. Such children were vanishingly rare and considered precious resources by the court, which had always sought to control all vampire bloodlines, pure or diluted. "If such a child exists," Victor said carefully, "what interest would the court have in her?" "Protection, naturally," Lazarus replied with unconvincing solicitude. "These are dangerous times for unaffiliated descendants of the great houses, especially those possessing items of significant mystical power." A sound from upstairs, faint but unmistakable to vampiric hearing, drew both their attention. One of the guards moved toward the grand staircase, but Victor blocked his path with preternatural speed. "Enough," Victor growled. "You've delivered your message. Now leave my domain." Lazarus studied him for a long moment. "You always were a poor liar, Victor. The child is here. I can smell her fear." His expression hardened. "The court requires both her and the key she carries. Surrender them willingly, and your rehabilitation will proceed smoothly. Refuse, and your exile will become significantly less comfortable." "Your threats mean nothing," Victor replied. "I've endured 3 centuries of punishment for crimes I didn't commit. What more can the court do to me?" "Perhaps nothing to you directly," Lazarus conceded. "But your servant? The child? There are many forms of persuasion available to us." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop as Victor's anger manifested physically, a cold, oppressive pressure that made even the elite guards shift uncomfortably. "Threaten them again," Victor said softly, "and exile will be the least of your concerns." Lazarus's eyes widened fractionally, not in fear, but in satisfaction, as though Victor had confirmed something important. "So you do protect the child? Interesting. One might almost think you recognize her significance." Before Victor could respond, a new commotion erupted outside the broken doors, shouts and the sound of running feet. A guard burst in, his uniform torn and bloody. "Inquisitor! Humans approach! Armed with blessed silver and sunfire grenades!" Lazarus whirled, his composure cracking for the first time. "Impossible! How could they have tracked us here?" "The hunters from the forest," Victor realized aloud. "They weren't ordinary men. They were night walkers." Lazarus paled visibly. The Night Walkers were an ancient human order dedicated to eradicating vampires, witch hunters with advanced weapons and fanatical determination. Long thought extinct, they had apparently returned in secret. "We must leave immediately," Lazarus commanded his guards. Turning back to Victor, he added, "This discussion isn't finished. The court will have the child and the key. Then the court will be disappointed," Victor replied coldly. With a final glare, Lazarus swept from the manor, his guards closing ranks around him. Through the broken doorway, Victor glimpsed movement at the forest's edge. At least a dozen figures in dark clothing, carrying weapons that gleamed ominously even in the daylight. Victor didn't hesitate. He barricaded the doors as best he could, then raced to find Barnabas. The old servant was in the kitchen already gathering supplies. "Nightwalkers," Victor confirmed grimly, "and the court knows about Eleanor." Barnabas nodded, unsurprised. "The passage beneath the east wing is still accessible. I've kept it maintained, as you instructed." "Prepare it," Victor ordered. "We have perhaps minutes before they breach the manor." Returning to the library, Victor unlocked the door to find Eleanor exactly where he'd left her. The lead box clutched tightly in her small hands. "Bad people are coming," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," Victor confirmed, kneeling before her. "We must leave Ravencroft immediately." To his surprise, tears welled in her eyes. "But this is your home." "It's a prison," he corrected gently. "One I've occupied far too long." Eleanor considered this, then nodded with surprising resolve. "Where will we go?" "First, to safety. Then—" Victor hesitated, realizing he had no plan beyond immediate escape. For centuries his existence had been defined by the boundaries of Ravencroft. Now those boundaries were collapsing. A tremendous explosion rocked the manor, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. The Nightwalkers had breached the outer defenses. "Come," Victor said, lifting Eleanor into his arms. The child clung to him, still clutching the mysterious box that had somehow catalyzed this upheaval in his carefully ordered exile. As they hurried through Ravencroft's labyrinthine corridors, the sounds of invasion grew louder. Shouting, splintering wood, the distinctive hiss of sunfire grenades designed to incinerate vampires. Barnabas waited for them at a seemingly blank wall in the east wing's farthest chamber. The servant pressed a hidden mechanism, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. "I've prepared lanterns," he said, handing one to Victor. "The tunnel emerges 2 miles east near the old chapel ruins." Victor set Eleanor down, but kept hold of her hand. "Lead the way, Barnabas. I'll guard our rear." As they descended into the tunnel, Eleanor looked up at Victor, her face ghostly in the lantern light. "Papa said you would know what to do with the key when the time came," she whispered. "Is it time now?" Victor met her gaze, struck anew by the trust she placed in him, a monster by any reasonable definition, yet her protector by some twist of fate or design. "Soon," he promised. "First, we must reach safety." The passage sealed behind them just as the sounds of intruders reached the east wing. Underground, surrounded by earth and stone, Victor felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in 3 centuries, he had left Ravencroft Manor, not as a defeated exile, but as a guardian with purpose. Eleanor's small hand tightened in his as they moved deeper into the tunnel. Behind them, Barnabas's lantern cast elongated shadows against the rough-hewn walls, and in the distance ahead, something waited, a future unwritten, full of danger and possibility. The lead box grew warm against Eleanor's side, where she'd tucked it into her makeshift belt. Neither she nor Victor noticed the faint, pulsing glow beginning to emanate from within, a light that matched perfectly the rhythm of the child's heartbeat, and strangely, the immortal's as well. The tunnels stretched before them like the throat of some ancient beast, air heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten time. Eleanor's breathing came in small, measured puffs as she struggled to keep pace, her wound clearly causing more pain than she would admit. Victor slowed his stride, acutely conscious of her fragility. "We can rest a moment," he offered, gesturing to a small alcove carved into the tunnel wall. "I'm fine," Eleanor insisted, though her pallor suggested otherwise. "How much farther?" Barnabas raised his lantern, illuminating the path ahead. "Perhaps half an hour more. The tunnel turns sharply soon, then follows an underground stream. A distant rumble shook dust from the ceiling, some explosion in the manor far above. Victor's jaw tightened. Ravencroft had stood for 8 centuries, weathering wars and calamities. That it should fall now, under his stewardship, stung more than he'd expected. "They're destroying everything, aren't they?" Eleanor asked quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "Buildings can be rebuilt," Victor replied, though the words rang hollow even to his ears. The manor contained irreplaceable artifacts, books of ancient knowledge, the accumulated treasures of a life that had spanned millennia. "Papa always said things aren't as important as people," Eleanor offered, her small face solemn in the lantern light. "But I still miss my books and my doll collection." The simple, childish regret struck Victor unexpectedly. When had he last mourned something so innocent? When had he last felt anything beyond the dull ache of exile and the thirst that was his eternal companion? The box at Eleanor's waist pulsed again, more noticeably now, its glow faintly visible through her borrowed shirt. "Eleanor," Victor said carefully, "the box your father gave you, it's active." She looked down in surprise, touching the container with hesitant fingers. "It's warm and humming?" Before Victor could respond, a new sound reached them, footsteps in the tunnel behind them moving with inhuman speed. "Impossible," Barnabas whispered. "No one could have found the passage entrance so quickly." "The court has resources we cannot fathom," Victor growled. "Run, now!" They sprinted forward, Eleanor gasping as the sudden movement pulled at her wound. Victor scooped her up without breaking stride, cradling her against his chest as they fled deeper into the earth. The box pulsed more strongly against his ribs where the child held it, its rhythm somehow synchronizing with his own dormant heartbeat. The tunnel branched unexpectedly, presenting 3 identical passages. Barnabas hesitated, raising his lantern. "Left," he decided after a moment. "The right fork collapsed decades ago, and the center leads to a dead end." The footsteps behind them multiplied, 2 pursuers now, perhaps 3, gaining ground with every passing second. "Go," Victor urged Barnabas. "I'll delay them." Eleanor clutched at his sleeve. "No, don't leave us." "I'll be right behind you," he promised, setting her down. "Take the box and go with Barnabas." Reluctantly, She nodded, her amber eyes wide with fear, yet trusting. Victor waited until they disappeared around a bend before turning to face what came. He didn't wait long. A figure materialized from the darkness, tall, elegant, moving with the liquid grace only the eldest vampires possessed. Not Lazarus, as Victor had expected, but a woman whose face he had not seen in 3 centuries. Eliza, he breathed, the name like a prayer and a curse combined. She stepped into the faint glow of a phosphorescent fungus that clung to the tunnel walls, revealing features as beautiful and terrible as he remembered. Alabaster skin, raven hair, eyes the color of Arctic ice. Once, she had been his greatest ally in the Crimson Court. Then, his betrayer. "Hello, Victor," she replied, her voice just as he remembered, musical, hypnotic. "You look diminished." "Exile will do that," he said flatly. "How did you find the tunnel?" Eliza smiled, a predator's expression. "I helped design Ravencroft's defenses, if you recall. Did you think I wouldn't include escape routes in the plans?" She gestured to the darkness behind her. "Lazarus doesn't know I'm here." "Not yet? Then what do you want?" "To warn you." She took a step closer, and Victor forced himself not to retreat. "The child bears the Blackwood bloodline, the last of your sister's descendants." The statement hit Victor like a physical blow. "Impossible! My sister died without issue." "So the court led you to believe," Eliza countered. "Another lie in a tapestry of deceptions. Elena lived long enough to bear a daughter, whom she hid among humans, to protect from the purge that followed your exile." Victor's mind raced. His sister, Elena, supposedly executed for supporting him during his trial. Could she have survived long enough to continue their bloodline? The implications staggered him. "The lunar birthmark," he murmured. "It follows the female line." "Precisely." Eliza's expression softened fractionally. "The child is your grandniece, Victor, the last of your blood. Why tell me this now, after centuries of silence?" "Because the balance shifts, as you well know. The court fractures from within. The Nightwalkers return in force." She glanced over her shoulder, as if fearing listeners. "And because the box the child carries contains the only weapon that might prevent the coming catastrophe." "What weapon?" "The key of ascension," Eliza whispered reverently. "Your sister died protecting it, ensuring it would pass through her bloodline until it could return to yours." Shouting echoed from the tunnel's entrance. Nightwalkers, having discovered the passage. Eliza tensed. "They cannot find me here," she said urgently. "The faction I represent within the court still operates in secret." "What faction?" Victor demanded. "The Truth Seekers. Those who believe your exile was unjust, founded on lies, perpetuated by the court's inner circle." She pressed something into his hand, a small, ornate dagger with a blade that gleamed silver in the dim light. "This will open the box when the time comes." "Not before." Before he could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. A gesture so unexpected that Victor froze. "Find Morgana at the Obsidian Tower," she whispered against his skin. "She's waited a long time to meet her great-uncle." Then she was gone, disappearing down the center passage that Barnabas had called a dead end. Victor stared after her, the dagger cold in his palm, her words echoing in his mind. The approaching Nightwalker's footsteps jolted him back to the present danger. Slipping the dagger into his boot, Victor hurried after Barnabas and Eleanor, his thoughts in chaos. He caught up to them where the tunnel widened into a natural cavern, a subterranean stream cutting through its center. Barnabas had already constructed a makeshift bridge from fallen stones. "You're here!" Eleanor cried upon seeing him, relief palpable in her voice. "I thought they got you." "It takes more than hunters to capture me," Victor assured her, though his mind still reeled from Eliza's revelations. He studied Eleanor's face with new awareness. Yes, there was something of Elena in her features, in the determined set of her jaw, and the intelligence behind her eyes. Family. After centuries alone, the concept seemed almost foreign. "The box grows more active," Barnabas noted as they crossed the stream. It responds to her emotions. Indeed, the lead container now emitted a steady glow, pulsing in rhythm with Eleanor's heartbeat. Victor could feel its power, a magnetic pull that seemed to tug at something deep within his own blood. "Did you see who followed us?" Barnabas asked quietly as Eleanor walked ahead. "An old acquaintance," Victor replied cautiously. "She claims the box contains something called the Key of Ascension." Barnabas's weathered face paled. "The lost key? Master, if true, this changes everything. The prophecies speak of its return, heralding the great convergence. Prophecies I've long dismissed as superstition." Victor reminded him. "Perhaps that is why it comes now," the old servant suggested, "when you've forgotten your own power." Before Victor could respond, the tunnel ahead lightened fractionally, the exit approaching. Relief surged through him until Eleanor suddenly stumbled, crying out in pain. "My side!" she gasped, pressing her hand against her wound. When she pulled it away, her fingers glistened with fresh blood. It opened again. Victor knelt beside her, gently lifting her shirt to examine the injury. The knife wound had indeed reopened, but something else concerned him more. Dark lines spreading outward from the cut, following the path of veins beneath her skin. "Poison," he realized with growing horror. "The blade that struck you was envenomed." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Am I going to die?" "No," Victor said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "We just need to get you to safety, where I can treat you properly." He gathered her into his arms, feeling her temperature already rising as the poison progressed. The box at her waist flared brightly now, its light casting strange dancing patterns across the tunnel walls. "Hurry!" Barnabas urged. "The exit is just ahead." They emerged into pale daylight, the tunnel opening concealed behind a tumble of stones near the ruins of an ancient chapel. Victor squinted against the sun, his skin prickling uncomfortably, though not burning as humans believed it would. 3 centuries of drinking only the barest minimum of blood had weakened his powers, including his resistance to sunlight. "The village of Thornfield lies 2 hours east," Barnabas said, pointing toward a distant smudge of smoke on the horizon. "They have a healer." "No villages," Victor decided. "The Nightwalkers will check them first." He scanned the landscape, gaze settling on a dense forest to the north. There, the old grove. It contains herbs that might slow the poison. Eleanor shivered in his arms, despite her rising fever. "The box," she murmured. "It wants to be opened now." Indeed, the lead container had begun to vibrate visibly, its glow intensifying to a near-blinding brightness. "Not yet," Victor told her, recalling Eliza's warning. "We need to reach safety first." They set off toward the forest, Victor carrying Eleanor, while Barnabas followed with their meager supplies. Behind them, smoke rose from the direction of Ravencroft Manor, his prison and home for 3 centuries, now likely reduced to ashes. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the forest when a new threat materialized, a sleek black carriage cresting a nearby hill, drawn by horses too swift and large to be natural. The Crimson Court's insignia blazed on its side, crimson against ebony. "Lazarus," Victor growled. "How did he find us so quickly?" "The box," Barnabas suggested. "Its power grows more visible by the minute." Victor quickened his pace, though he knew the carriage would overtake them long before they reached the forest's shelter. Eleanor's breathing had grown labored, her skin hot to the touch. "Put me down," she said suddenly, her voice surprisingly strong despite her condition. "The box needs to be opened now." "Eleanor, Papa said you'd know what to do with it," she insisted, "and it's telling me it's time." "Please, Uncle Victor." The title, so casually bestowed yet carrying the weight of centuries, stunned him momentarily. She knew somehow, perhaps she had always known on some instinctive level. The carriage bore down on them, now close enough that Victor could see Lazarus's triumphant expression through its window. Behind them, figures emerged from the tunnel entrance. Nightwalkers, weapons raised. Trapped between ancient enemies, Victor made his decision. Setting Eleanor gently on the grass, he retrieved Eliza's dagger from his boot. "Barnabas, shield her eyes," he commanded. The old servant wrapped Eleanor in his cloak as Victor examined the lead box. No visible seams or locks marred its surface, yet when he pressed the dagger's tip to its center, the metal yielded like water. Light erupted from within. Not the warm glow of before, but a searing prismatic radiance that sliced through reality itself. Victor staggered back, momentarily blinded, as something emerged from the container. When his vision cleared, he beheld a crystalline key floating above the open box, rotating slowly in mid-air. No larger than his thumb, it contained what appeared to be a universe in miniature, stars and nebulae swirling within its transparent form. The key of ascension, Barnabas whispered reverently. Eleanor reached for it, her small hand steady despite her illness. "It's beautiful." "Don't touch it," Victor warned, but too late. Her fingers closed around the crystalline object. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then power exploded outward in a concussive wave, knocking both Victor and Barnabas to the ground. Eleanor remained standing, the key clutched in her fist, her eyes now glowing with the same prismatic light that emanated from between her fingers. "Child," she said, but the voice was not her own, deeper, ancient, resonating with power that made the very air vibrate. "Vessel, guardian." Victor struggled to his feet. "Eleanor?" Her head turned toward him, though her gaze seemed to look through rather than at him. "The girl fades. The poison works quickly. If you would save her, Victor Dracul, you must accept what was always yours." "What are you?" Victor demanded. "What have you done to her?" "I am the key. I am the way. I am the truth your court has sought to bury for 1,000 years. The entity using Eleanor's body turned toward the approaching carriage, which had slowed as its occupants witnessed the supernatural display. "Your enemies converge. Choose quickly, last son of House Dracul. Accept your birthright, or watch the child perish and the world follow." The carriage doors burst open as Lazarus and his guards emerged, their expressions mixtures of awe and avarice. From the tunnel entrance, the Nightwalkers advanced cautiously, crossbows trained on Eleanor's glowing form. "The key reveals itself at last," Lazarus called out, his voice carrying across the field. "Surrender it, Victor, and the court might yet show mercy." "The ancient evil stirs beneath the mountains," Eleanor Key intoned. "The convergence approaches. Without a true guardian to wield the key, darkness will consume all." Victor looked from Eleanor's possessed form to the enemies surrounding them, understanding finally dawning. The prophecies Barnabas had mentioned, the great convergence, not superstition after all, but a cataclysm long foretold. "If I accept this birthright," Victor asked carefully, "what happens to Eleanor?" "The poison recedes. The child lives." The entity's gaze softened slightly. "But the path you walk thereafter will not be easy. To be guardian is to stand between worlds, belonging fully to neither." "Haven't I always?" Victor murmured. Making his decision, Victor stepped forward and placed his hand over Eleanor's, where she clutched the key. The crystalline object pulsed once, then shattered, dissolving into motes of light that spiraled up their arms, enveloping both in a cocoon of radiance. Visions flooded Victor's mind. The true history of his kind, the ancient pact that had established the Crimson Court, the betrayal that had led to his sister's death and his own exile. He saw the convergence, a thinning of barriers between dimensions that would allow ancient horrors to return unless the Guardian stood firm with the key's power. When the light receded, Eleanor slumped unconscious into his arms, but her breathing had steadied, the dark lines of poison already fading from her skin. Victor himself stood transformed, his centuries of weakened exile burned away in an instant of cosmic truth. Power coursed through him, familiar yet entirely new. The key's essence had merged with his blood, fulfilling a destiny written before his birth. He could feel the approaching convergence now, a pressure building at the edges of reality, seeking ingress. "Impossible," Lazarus breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. The key was supposed to be a physical artifact, not this. "Your court has perpetuated many falsehoods," Victor replied, his voice resonating with newfound authority. "The key was never an object to be possessed, but a power to be embodied." The Nightwalkers, sensing the shift in power, opened fire, crossbow bolts streaking toward Victor and his unconscious charge. With a gesture that felt as natural as breathing, Victor created a barrier of shimmering energy that disintegrated the projectiles before they could reach their target. "The child still houses part of the key's essence," Lazarus declared, regaining his composure. "The court claims her by right of blood and ancient law. You claim what was never yours to take," Victor countered. With Eleanor cradled in one arm, he raised his free hand toward Ravencroft's distant, burning form. "My exile ends today, Lazarus. Tell your masters the Guardian returns." Energy surged from his outstretched hand, arcing across miles to strike the manor's ruins. The ground shook as ancient wards activated. Defenses deeper and older than even the structure itself, now responding to Victor's awakened power. A massive translucent dome shimmered into existence, encapsulating Ravencroft's extensive grounds. Within it, the flames extinguished instantly, and the Nightwalkers caught inside froze in place, imprisoned in a time stasis field. Lazarus paled visibly. "You can't possibly maintain such power. Not without blood," Victor finished for him, allowing his newly sharpened fangs to show. "Another of your court's lies. Our kind never needed to prey on humans. Blood is merely the most expedient source of the life energy we require. There are others." As if to demonstrate, he drew energy from the earth beneath his feet, from the air, from the very fabric of reality, power flowing into him in visible currents of light. His centuries of self-imposed starvation had inadvertently prepared him for this moment, teaching him to subsist on the barest minimum, until he could reclaim his true nature. "This isn't over," Lazarus warned, signaling his guards to retreat toward the carriage. "The court will not recognize your claim as guardian." "The court's recognition means nothing," Victor replied. "The convergence approaches, with or without their acknowledgement. Those who stand with me will survive what comes. Those who oppose me—" He let the implication hang in the air between them. As Lazarus and his entourage withdrew, Barnabas approached cautiously. "Master, what happens now?" Victor looked down at Eleanor's sleeping form, her features peaceful despite all she had endured. The piece of the key she harbored had bonded with her, accelerating the awakening of her dormant vampiric heritage while purging the poison from her system. "Now we find Morgana at the Obsidian Tower," he decided, recalling Eliza's parting words, "and we prepare for war." The sky darkened suddenly, clouds gathering with unnatural speed. A distant rumbling, too deep and prolonged to be thunder, shook the ground beneath their feet. "It begins already," Victor murmured, feeling reality itself shudder as the first tremors of the convergence rippled outward from some distant epicenter. "The barriers weaken sooner than I expected." Eleanor stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment they still glowed with prismatic light before settling back to their amber hue. "Uncle Victor," she whispered, "I had the strangest dream." "Rest, little one," he soothed. "We have a long journey ahead." As if responding to some unspoken command, a mist began to gather around them, thickening until it formed a swirling portal of silvery light. "The key shows us the way," Victor explained to Barnabas, who stared in open-mouthed astonishment. "Are you ready to leave Ravencroft behind forever, old friend?" The servant straightened his aged spine, determination replacing shock. "I go where you go, master, as has been my family's way for generations." With Eleanor secure in his arms, Victor stepped toward the portal, feeling the key's power surge within him, a beacon cutting through centuries of lies and manipulation. Beyond that shimmering veil waited the Obsidian Tower, his niece Morgana, and the first steps toward reclaiming not just his honor, but the true purpose of his immortal bloodline. Behind them, the sky continued to darken as ancient forces stirred from slumber, sensing the key's reactivation. The convergence had begun, and with it, a war for the very soul of reality itself. Victor Dracul, once exiled lord, now awakened guardian, stepped through the portal with his unlikely family, the last two beings in all creation who trusted him completely. Whether that trust was warranted, only time would tell. But for the first time in 3 centuries, he walked toward a future rather than away from a past. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, other powers watched, waited, and prepared to move against the newly risen guardian and the child who carried the other half of the key's awesome power. The portal's silvery membrane parted like liquid mercury around them, enveloping Victor, Eleanor, and Barnabas in a cocoon of shimmering light. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, they existed between worlds, suspended in a crystalline void where time lost all meaning. Then, with a sensation like plunging into icy water, they emerged onto solid ground. The obsidian tower loomed before them, a structure that defied conventional architecture. Spiraling obsidian spires twisted toward a bruised sky, their surfaces reflecting fractured images of the surrounding landscape. No windows pierced its glossy exterior, yet light seemed to emanate from within, pulsing like a living heartbeat. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, now awake, though still cradled in Victor's arms. The poison had receded completely, leaving her pale but alert, her amber eyes wide with wonder. "And dangerous," Victor cautioned, setting her gently on her feet. "Stay close." They approached the tower's base, where no visible entrance marred the seamless obsidian surface. Victor placed his palm against the cool stone, feeling the key's power resonate within him. The obsidian rippled like disturbed water, forming an archway that beckoned them inward. "Master," Barnabas hesitated, his weathered face reflecting uncertainty. "I sense powerful wards." "They recognize us," Victor assured him, though in truth he felt the tower's ancient defenses assessing them, particularly Eleanor, whose portion of the key's essence flickered visibly beneath her skin when she stood in the tower's shadow. The interior revealed a vast circular chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. 7 doorways punctuated the curved wall, each identical, save for the runes etched into the archways. At the chamber's center stood a woman, her back to them as she studied a 3-dimensional map composed of floating lights. "Aunt Morgana?" Eleanor called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. The woman turned, and Victor felt recognition strike him like a physical blow. Though he had never met her before, Morgana's features echoed his sister Elena's so strongly that he might have been looking at a ghost. Her eyes, the same amber as Eleanor's, widened with similar recognition. "The Guardian returns," she said, her voice rich and resonant, "and sooner than the prophecies foretold." She approached them with fluid grace, her midnight blue robes flowing around her like water. Though she appeared no older than 30, Victor sensed centuries of life in her gaze as she studied him. "You have her eyes," Victor said softly. "Elena's eyes." Morgana's expression softened. "My grandmother spoke of you often. She believed until her death that you would return to set things right." "How?" Victor began, but she raised a hand to silence him. "There will be time for explanations. But first, we must complete what began at Ravencroft." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, who instinctively moved closer to Victor. "The child carries the feminine aspect of the key. You, the masculine, together, but not yet truly unified." "I don't understand," Eleanor admitted. Morgana knelt before her, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "The key of ascension contains 2 principles, little one, creation and protection. You hold the power to create, to heal, to bring forth. Your great-uncle holds the power to protect, to defend, to stand against the darkness. Only when both aspects work in harmony can the convergence be properly guided." The floating lights of the map behind her coalesced into a new configuration, a representation of their world, with countless glowing threads stretching from it into a swirling void beyond. Where the threads clustered most densely, reality itself seemed to thin, creating apertures between dimensions. The convergence accelerates, Morgana explained, rising to her feet. Already, the ancient enemies emerge through the weakest points. The Crimson Court fights them, but without the key's guidance, they merely postpone the inevitable. Lazarus seemed more interested in possessing the key than using it against these enemies, Victor noted. The court fractured centuries ago, though few know it, Morgana replied. The inner circle, led by Lazarus, seeks to harness the convergence rather than prevent it, to absorb the power of these intrusions for their own ascension. And the truth seekers? Victor asked, recalling Eliza's words. We seek to restore balance. Morgana gestured, and one of the 7 doorways illuminated. Come. There is someone who has waited a very long time to see you again. They followed her through the glowing archway into a smaller chamber. At its center rested a crystalline sarcophagus, its surface clouded with frost. Within lay a female figure, perfectly preserved, dark hair framing a face Victor had believed lost forever. Elena, he breathed, approaching the crystal casket with halting steps. How is this possible? Not dead, but suspended, Morgana explained. When the court came for her, she had already transferred her portion of the key to her daughter. Rather than allow them to execute her, she induced a death-like trance, one that has preserved her for centuries, while her essence remained tethered to the key. My grandmother, Eleanor whispered, pressing her small hand against the crystal surface. She awaits reawakening, Morgana continued, but only the unified key can restore her. Victor placed his hand beside Eleanor's on the sarcophagus, feeling his sister's dormant presence within. 3 centuries of believing her executed, of carrying the guilt of her supposed death, emotions he had long suppressed, threatened to overwhelm him. The court lied about everything, he said, his voice rough with long-denied grief. My trial, her execution, the very nature of our power. To control the narrative is to control the world, Morgana replied. But the time for deception ends today. A tremor shook the tower, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. The convergence map in the main chamber would be showing new breaches, Victor knew, more incursions from the ancient enemies his kind had once sworn to contain. We must unify the key, he decided. Now, before more breaches form. It's not so simple, Morgana cautioned. The unification requires a ritual, and the backlash of power could destroy Eleanor if she's not properly prepared. Then prepare me, Eleanor said with unexpected determination. She turned from the sarcophagus, her young face set with purpose beyond her years. I want to help my grandmother and stop the bad things from coming through. Morgana studied her, respect kindling in her ancient eyes. The Blackwood courage never dilutes, it seems. Very well. The ritual chamber lies at the tower's heart. As they returned to the central hall, a new tremor, stronger than before, shook the structure. One of the 7 doorways cracked, obsidian fragments skittering across the floor as darkness seeped through the breach. They've found us already, Morgana hissed, summoning a sphere of protective energy around their group. The court must have tracked your portal. But what emerged from the fractured doorway was neither Crimson Court nor Nightwalkers. A sinuous, shadowy form slithered into the chamber, a creature of pure darkness with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like dying stars. Void Stalker, Barnabas gasped, placing himself protectively before Eleanor despite his age and frailty. I thought them mere legend. The first wave, Morgana confirmed grimly. The weakest of what comes. Victor stepped forward, feeling the key's power surge within him. With instincts he hadn't known he possessed, he channeled that power outward, creating a blade of pure energy that materialized in his hand. Get Eleanor to the ritual chamber, he commanded. I'll hold it here. Uncle Victor, no! Eleanor cried, but Barnabas was already pulling her toward another doorway, following Morgana's urgent gestures. The Void Stalker uncoiled its impossible form, standing nearly twice Victor's height. Its maw, a vertical slash filled with crystalline teeth, opened in a silent scream as it launched itself toward him. Victor met it with newfound power, his energy blade slicing through shadow substance. The creature shrieked, a sound like glass shattering, and recoiled, dark ichor dripping from its wound. But more shadows leaked through the damaged doorway, taking form as they emerged. "This way!" Morgana called from another archway. "You cannot defeat them all!" Recognizing the truth in her words, Victor retreated strategically, maintaining a barrier of energy between the creatures and their group. They hurried through the illuminated archway, which sealed behind them with a thought from Morgana, temporarily containing the incursion. The passage spiraled downward, leading them deeper into the tower's foundations. Eleanor kept pace surprisingly well, drawing strength from her portion of the key. Barnabas, however, struggled with the descent, his aged body betraying him despite his determined spirit. "I'll slow you down," he gasped, leaning heavily against the wall. "Go, complete the ritual." "We don't abandon family," Victor replied firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his words. He lifted the old servant as easily as he might carry a child. "You've stood by me through centuries of exile. I'll not leave you now." Barnabas's weathered face creased with emotion. "Family," he repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose we are." They reached the ritual chamber, a perfectly circular room with a raised dais at its center. Concentric circles of ancient runes covered the floor, ceiling and walls, glowing with inner light. At the dais's center stood two crystalline pedestals, clearly meant for Victor and Eleanor. "Quickly!" Morgana urged, helping Barnabas to a stone bench along the wall. "The tower's defenses won't hold the Void Stalkers for long, and I sense other presences approaching from without." "The court?" Victor asked, setting Eleanor gently on one pedestal before taking his place on the other. "And Nightwalkers," Morgana confirmed. "Enemies united by common greed, if not common purpose." She began the ritual, her hands weaving complex patterns as she chanted in a language older than human civilization. The runes responded, their glow intensifying until the chamber blazed with eldritch light. Victor felt the key's essence stirring within him, reaching outward toward its counterpart in Eleanor. The child gasped as her portion responded, golden light spilling from her eyes and fingertips. "Don't fight it," Morgana instructed her. "Let the energies find their natural balance." A column of radiance erupted between the pedestals, connecting Victor and Eleanor in a circuit of pure power. Within that light, Victor saw visions, the true history of his kind, not as predators, but as guardians, sworn to protect reality from threats beyond mortal comprehension. He saw the Crimson Court's corruption, how they had twisted their sacred duty into a quest for dominance. He saw Eleanor's future, not as a child, but as a woman of immense power and compassion, standing against darkness with the same determination she showed now, and he saw what must be done to guide the convergence. "The patterns align," Morgana called out, her voice barely audible over the roaring energy. "Speak the words, Guardian." Victor reached across the light to clasp Eleanor's small hand. Together they spoke words that neither had known before this moment. An incantation as old as time itself, calling the key to full manifestation. The chamber dissolved around them, reality itself peeling away to reveal the cosmic architecture beneath. They stood at a nexus point where countless dimensions intersected, where the convergence threatened to collapse all into primordial chaos. "There!" Eleanor pointed with her free hand. At the center of the maelstrom floated a crystalline structure, the true key of ascension in its complete form, not merely the fragment they had carried. "We need to reach it." Together, they stepped off the pedestals into the void between worlds, supported by the power flowing between them. The key grew larger as they approached, revealing its complexity, a multidimensional lattice that served as both lock and key to reality itself. Behind them, darkness gathered as the Void Stalkers breached the ritual chamber's defenses. Before them, the Crimson Court's forces materialized from another approach, Lazarus at their head. And from yet another vector came the Nightwalkers, their weapons trained on the key. "We're surrounded," Eleanor whispered, her hand tightening in Victor's. "Then we go forward," he replied simply. They reached the key together, each extending their free hand to touch its crystalline surface. The moment of contact brought clarity, understanding of what must be done to correct centuries of imbalance. "The key cannot be possessed," Victor announced, his voice carrying across dimensional barriers to reach all who sought to claim it. "It can only be stewarded." The lattice structure responded to their touch, reconfiguring itself into a complex network that spread outward, restoring natural barriers between dimensions while establishing controlled pathways. The convergence would continue, but guided now, a controlled process rather than catastrophic collapse. "This is not what was foretold," Lazarus protested, his form wavering at the edges as reality reasserted itself. "The key was meant to grant ultimate power to its wielder." "Another lie," Victor replied calmly. "The key grants only the power to serve, to maintain balance between worlds. That is our true inheritance, not dominion." The lattice completed its reconfiguration, sending a pulse of restorative energy outward. Where it touched the void stalkers, they disintegrated, banished back to their native dimension. Where it reached the tower above, damaged structures repaired themselves, and where it found Elena's suspended form, it breathed life back into 3 centuries of stasis. Reality solidified around them once more. Victor and Eleanor stood on the pedestals in the ritual chamber, but now a third figure had joined them. Elena, awakened from her long sleep, her eyes wide with wonder. "Brother," she whispered, reaching out to touch Victor's face with trembling fingers. "You came back to us." "I never left willingly," he replied, covering her hand with his own. "And I'll never leave again." Eleanor launched herself into her grandmother's arms with a cry of joy. "I knew we could save you. Uncle Victor promised we would." Morgana approached, tears streaming unashamedly down her face as she embraced her long-dormant mother. "The family reunites at last," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "As the prophecies foretold, Lazarus and his court forces materialized fully in the chamber, though their power seemed diminished by the key's restructuring. The High Inquisitor's face contorted with thwarted ambition. "This changes nothing," he declared. "The court still rules our kind. Your stewardship means nothing without our recognition. Look around you, Lazarus," Victor replied, gesturing to where the chamber's walls had become transparent, revealing the world beyond. Throughout the realm, vampires looked up in wonder as the sky cleared of the convergence's chaotic energy, replaced by a subtle lattice visible only to immortal eyes, a reminder of their true purpose. Our kind remembers its original calling now. The court can adapt to this new reality, or it can fade into irrelevance. Faced with this undeniable shift in power, many of Lazarus's own guards knelt before Victor, Eleanor, recognizing the true authority of the key's stewards. The High Inquisitor, seeing his support crumbling, retreated with what dignity he could muster, though Victor knew they had not seen the last of him. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked, still holding tightly to her grandmother's hand, her other clasped in Victor's. "Now we rebuild," Eleanor answered, looking toward the future with eyes that had seen too much of the past. The true Crimson Court. The true guardianship. Beginning with Ravencroft, Victor decided. No longer a prison, but a fortress against the darkness, a home for all who seek to uphold the balance. Barnabas approached, bowing deeply before Elena. "My family has waited centuries to serve the complete Dracul bloodline again, my lady. The manor awaits your return." The old servant's loyalty brought a smile to Eleanor's lips. "Rise, faithful friend. In the world we build now, none shall bow to others. We stand as equals against the coming storms." As if in answer to her words, a distant rumbling shook the tower, not the chaotic tremors of the convergence, but a controlled restructuring as reality settled into new patterns. "Some intrusions will still occur," Morgana warned. "The barriers thin in cycles. Our work has just begun." "Then we face it together," Victor replied, looking at the family he'd never expected to find. His sister returned from death's threshold, his niece with centuries of wisdom in her eyes, and Eleanor, this remarkable child who carried not just his bloodline, but his hope for the future. For the first time in 300 years, Victor Dracul felt something he had thought lost forever, not just purpose, but belonging. The darkness would come again, as it always did. The Crimson Court would resist change. The Nightwalkers would continue their crusade. New threats would emerge from beyond the dimensional barriers. But they would face these challenges as the Key's stewards, as guardians of a balance larger than any single realm. And they would face them together, a family forged in adversity and united by blood, both literal and chosen. Eleanor slipped her hand into his as they prepared to leave the chamber. Her amber eyes, so like his sister's, so like his own once had been, shining with unconditional trust. "We're going home," she said, not a question, but a statement of perfect faith. Victor nodded, feeling the weight of centuries lifting from his shoulders. "Yes, little one, we're going home." Above them, the stars aligned in patterns unseen for millennia, heralding not an ending, but a beginning. The Guardian had returned, the Key was whole, and in the balance between light and shadow, a new age dawned.